Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland. On the Majority Report, want to welcome to the program Prem Thakker, politics reporter at the Intercept. Prem, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I've been a big fan, so it's a treat to be here.
Well, we appreciate your work.
Yeah.
So, all right, fill us in on what happened. I mean, Colombia is an interesting university for this to be happening. I mean, because there has been a very long, certainly predating October 7th, long history of protesting there on both sides. In fact, gosh, what's her face? The IDW.
Barry Weiss.
Yeah, Barry Weiss. Before she complained about how college kids were silencing people on campus, she was a Columbia University student trying to get professors who spoke in any way of Palestinians being human beings or deserving rights. She tried to get them fired.
Yes.
Just to give a little backdrop there. But tell us about this most recent incident or what's been happening at Columbia since October 7th.
Yeah, so to your point, of course, Columbia as a campus is no stranger to student activism, dating back for decades, back to 1968 and so on. With regards to Israel-Palestine, I mean, there have been numerous referendums on campus with regards to divestment. In 2018 and 2020, both Columbia College and Barnard College had referendums, both passed with about 64-ish% of students saying that they favor the university divesting from companies that might be implicated in Israel's occupation. And so this protest on Friday was just a continuation of an ongoing movement that generations of students have kind of been about. So this protest on Friday was also geared towards divestment. It was also encouraging students to consider striking their tuition, to push the university to more seriously consider divestment. And this, like many other protests, came in response to universities either not being more transparent about their investments or refusing to meet with students or just dismissing previous votes from student bodies. So that was the context of this protest. There were faculty members there that were talking about, different university faculty members in Gaza that have been killed by Israeli forces. So that was the context of all of this. There were student groups from all sorts of places. There's now a coalition of 90-something student groups because last semester Columbia suspended the Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace student groups because of an unauthorized event that's what they called it. So now these can
I stop you there? Was there a precedent for this unauthorized event thing? Like, I find it really hard to believe that every group in the history of Columbia University who have had protests had their protest authorized. It's just, you hear like, groups like, Palestinians for Justice or Jews for Peace doesn't sound like the type of groups that you got to be worried about in terms of revoking their charter.
Yeah, so this is something else that I've been covering throughout. This is not just at Columbia, but at schools across the country, and certainly not just Ivy League schools, certainly, where there are certain policies on the books with regards to how students gather, how students organize, how long they can stay in buildings, all sorts of provisions like that generally have not been sort of used to sort of police or manage how students gather. But they are being used much more with regards to students concerned with what's going on in Gaza. And that's been the case in minor ways, for years, but particularly in the past 3 months because of just this groundswell upswing of student activism across the country. Universities are being much more nitpicky about how they choose to use and not use certain policies. So there might be standing rules that are on the books, but they haven't been used to this extent. One example is there's been numerous sit-ins across the country at all sorts of college campuses, and a lot of students at those campuses have noted to me that, sure, technically we are violating X, Y, and Z rule, but the consequences that they face are ones that have not been faced by other students who might be, for instance, burning couches after a big football game or just being rowdy or being publicly drunk, which, no shade, whatever. But these are things that are not met with such harsh consequences, whereas these students especially ones that have done sit-ins, are facing even criminal charges brought by their own institutions that they pay to go to and learn from.
Yeah, I mean, and I just want to add, Rashid Khalidi, right, is the one of the in the wake of, Edward Said's passing, right? He is the leading Palestinian academic in America, and he teaches at Columbia University. That is just an example of how the author of the 100 Years' War on Palestine, which everyone should read, an example of how this tradition is like very deeply embedded, or a recent tradition within Columbia University, and the tensions there. Like, have you, in your reporting outside of just Columbia, documented and seen some of the ways that these pro-Palestinian students are being doxxed, being harassed by folks who right-wing groups, like at Harvard University, where they were putting out LED screens with the pro-Palestinian students' faces and things like that? I mean, what has been that kind of what's the temperature of that right now?
Yeah. I mean, that is certainly an element that's taken place at, again, campuses across the country. Those trucks were not just limited necessarily to Harvard's campus nor Columbia's campus. There's also just sort of interpersonal threats that these students face, many of which is why some students often speak to me on background, just because they have faced threats from their campus communities. And that also has nothing to say about outlets like Canary Mission, that, as many viewers may know, is this website that collects pretty much personal information, and increasingly incredibly granular, I should say, personal information about students who express sympathies or concern for Palestine. They're framed as being pro-Hamas terrorist sympathizers, and sort of the granularity in which some of these websites get to people's personal information, even, the things related to their family and friends. It's deeply concerning. And I think one thing to your point about Professor Rashid Khalidi is he told me that, for a lot of young people, this is just a very significant moment in their lives. This is one of the worst humanitarian crises that they are getting a front seat towards. Of course, there are many, many crises around the world that America might have a hand in, but this is one in which, America has sent billions of dollars of aid to, has been sort of contributing to for decades, especially, of course, for the lifetimes of people my age. And so I think one thing that's missing from a lot of sort of media coverage and media treatment of these students is that there's no just basic premise acknowledgement that these students are coming from a place of just deep offense at an injustice that they are watching happen, as many of these activists say, in their name. And I think one thing that stuck out to me as I've talked to students across the country is that even if they purport themselves to be sort of hardened by the world, cynical, or, having tempered expectations as kind of this world can do to young people, they still have this optimism that this misery in our world is not a choice, it's not inevitable, it's not something that they want to sign up for. And so to the professor's point, this moment is a moment that tests that resolve for them. So naturally, as we see these protests get increasingly larger, as they do sit-ins, even in administrators' offices, these are not coming from nowhere. They're based off of a very rational emotion that we can understand and internalize, and one that when they're not being met after they ask for transparency, or just for the universities to say, hey, where are we investing? Of course, they will escalate. So I think if we observe from that generosity and empathy, I think the media would hopefully begin to treat these students a bit differently, to the point that we're not covering them days later.
It's also interesting to me, I mean, having been part of the student movement against apartheid in the mid 80s, and maybe I just, there wasn't cable news, and I'm in college and I'm not getting the New York Times delivered to my dorm room, and, there's no cable news. I don't know how much TV I watched at that time. So I didn't have necessarily I wouldn't necessarily have been exposed to the level of pushback, if it existed, in terms of like just I don't remember anybody ever saying, why are you so interested in South Africa? Like, I mean, it never, and I had,
Jonathan Chait wrote a piece for University of Michigan student newspaper that was kind of like that. But
okay, fair enough. There may have been people say, but that was not, there was never a sense of what we had to justify an interest in this. There was arguments as to what we should do. Should we be involved in constructive engagement? And we were specifically trying to get our colleges to divest from South Africa and divestiture. That's what it was all about at that time. Take the money that we had in our endowments and pull it out of any company in terms of, I guess it was stock holdings, any company or maybe corporate bonds, who knows, any involvement, any companies that were involved in South Africa. And there was never, and I had this argument with the I think it was the chairman of the board of our college, who was also the CEO of Pfizer, who had a lot of investment in South Africa. And there was never why are you so interested in this? Do you not like white people or something like that? That was never something I had to justify. And I had no connection to South Africa. I mean, none. And that part is, I think, like a very interesting dynamic that we don't generally see. I don't remember even like when it was like free Tibet. I don't remember people having to justify, like, why are you so interested in Tibet?
Well, I mean, I think the point is just South Africa, that wasn't the top recipient of our military aid, right? I mean,
we had even less reason, theoretically, to be invested in that.
Exactly.
And we still didn't hear any, that type of thing. So, but all right, with all that said, let's talk about this latest incident on Columbia University, because this isn't just a question of the university being sort of hostile to the protests. It's like there seemed to be, at least their knee-jerk reaction is to protect people who are now arguably assaulting, allegedly, the protesters.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
So, as many people might already know, at this protest, there were allegedly two individuals who were sort of fading into the crowd, making themselves part of this crowd. But at some points, they were very much not. They were confronting some Jewish students who had a banner that had CU Jews for Ceasefire, Columbia University Jews for Ceasefire on it. And these individuals called them traitors, self-hating Jews, and the like. And they were calling other students, Palestinian and non-Palestinian students, terrorist sympathizers, and so on and so forth. Filming them, confronting them, approaching them, just kind of harassing them throughout the protest. And these same individuals were allegedly the same ones who then sprayed these students with some, at this time, non-confirmed chemical. Students allege that they think it's some form of skunk. And for those who don't know, skunk is this chemical that's sort of notorious for very intense, severe effects. I think it was the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that wrote, I have the quote here, "Skunk is liable to cause physical harm, such as intense nausea, vomiting, and skin rashes, in addition to any injury resulting from the powerful force of the spray. Examinations by police and army medical teams in the past have also indicated that the excessive coughing caused by exposure can result in suffocation." And that's one of numerous accounts from different outlets like BBC and so forth that have described the dangers of this chemical. Students think it's some form of it. It's not confirmed yet. What I will say is, and I've seen medical records of students that have visited the hospital since, there were numerous individuals that had to go to either medical care, urgent care, the campus health center, or an off-campus hospital to get treatment for anything from nausea to staying headaches to stomach and chest pain to pain in their abdomen, all sorts of symptoms that are naturally very concerning. So we don't know the exact chemical yet. We do know that numerous students felt pretty darn bad after being exposed to it. So after this, the university's first response, after, again, there were viral tweets about this was not some sort of mystery. The first response was, I believe, late Sunday night, when the Department of Public Safety, so not from the administration itself, the Department of Public Safety sent out a very late notice on Instagram, and I believe by email as well, saying that there was a troubling incident. They were working with authorities. Not much detail beyond that, a very short message. The next morning, the provost sent an email that was much more vague in general, sort of reiterating campus policy about protests, reiterating that, some of those policies include not causing bodily harm, but no more details beyond that. And then while we were writing the story, we reached out to the university, of course, and one of the series of questions I asked was about their response, how they're navigating the fact that students, of course, feel very unsafe on campus at the moment, and along with a few other questions. And the response they gave to us was pretty much saying that the protest was an unauthorized event, and they kind of left it at that. They didn't really answer too much about other questions. And so, of course, we reported that in our story. And an hour later, within an hour later, I'm not sure the exact timestamp, the provost sent a follow-up email, finally explicitly acknowledging both the incident in more clear terms, exactly that they were working with authorities, including the NYPD, who's taking the lead on this, and that the perpetrators were banned from campus and that they were being investigated for possible hate crimes. So that was a much bigger escalation than the previous statements that both we got and that were given to the campus community. And remember, this was over 2 to 3 day span. The protest was Friday. Sunday, late Sunday night was when the Department of Public Safety issued that statement. Wow. So that's a lot of hours.
A lot of hours. And I'm unclear. Have they identified the two people who are at least accused of allegedly using this skunk spray?
Yes. So I'm waiting for the university to get back to me on officially confirming that identification. Presumably, since they were banned from campus, that would mean yes. And of course, again, this investigation is ongoing. So before we make any definitive claims on who was or was not involved, we should wait for that confirmation. And that's something, of course, I'll keep an eye on as well. But in terms of the individuals themselves, so this is actually an interesting detail. They have been allegedly banned, and I'm waiting for clarification from the university on this as well, because some students have reported, and I've heard from some sources that these students have been seen on campus. And Colombia actually does have an open campus, so it is a bit of a challenge to sort of monitor that. One thing that the university can do is sort of disable their university ID cards. But the issue, or a hair here, is just that a student has reported that one of the alleged perpetrators was seen in a lounge that you can only access with university ID. So whether or not this ban is in place or how it's being monitored is still up in the air. And of course, I'll monitor that and we'll report on if I hear back or find any confirmation. But that's the state right now of the perpetrators.
And so at least one of them may be a Columbia student. Is that it? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes.
And I also heard early reports that they had some relation to the IDF, or is that just sort of loose talk, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, it's not loose talk insofar as if these alleged perpetrators are indeed the ones, it's not loose ties, it's that they had served. There's even one CBS interview with one of the alleged perpetrators in the aftermath of the Hamas attack on October 7th, where he's, naturally, of course, very emotional about the attack and saying how he wants to go back again and sort of support the cause. So again, it is all pending on if it is confirmed that these two are the individuals, but they certainly wouldn't be loose ties.
Okay. And to be clear, just about everybody who does not have a religious exemption in Israel serves in the IDF. And so it's not, it is for an Israeli to have served in the IDF or, some American, European, people do that.
Yes.
That does not necessarily mean there's some type of nefarious plot by the IDF to be involved in this.
Yeah.
That association is not as sort of that is not in any way atypical of someone who may have come from Israel and going to a college here or something like that.
Definitely.
All right. Well, and so it sounds like we're on the brink of, in the next 24 hours, confirmation as to the identification of these perpetrators, and then seeing the university begin to make some type of investigation as to, or resolve an investigation as to what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, we should be getting close. And I guess one other point that I'm sure is not lost on many people watching this, but it is deeply concerning the extent to which not just pro-Palestinian students, but just Arab appearing students, to even just allies of people in Palestine, are not being given the sort of generosity and credence that all students deserve. All students deserve a level of care and compassion that these students just do not seem to be being afforded. The fact that we've had a 6-year-old sweet Palestinian soul taken in Chicago, that we've had 3 Palestinian boys shot who were students as well, that we now have this incident, and that's only big ticket incidents. That's notwithstanding the ongoing harassment that students and allies face. It's very concerning, and it'll be very interesting to see which members of Congress begin to operate and sort of support that basic premise that every young person in this country deserves to feel safe.
Prem Thakker, politics reporter at The Intercept. We'll put a link to your work over at The Intercept and these pieces in particular. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.
All right, you too.